Instead of giving you the whole timeline of the whole history of the city of Amsterdam, I want to do this a little bit differently. What I want to do is I want to tell you a little bit about the beginning, and then as we move along through the city, I will tell you more moments in history, and by telling you those moments, I hope I can tell you, at least in broad lines, the history of the city. And we are standing right now in a place called the Brakke Grond. And the Brakke Grond means the brackish ground. The brackish ground is a ground where water is basically partly salt and partly sweet, the water. And that's basically, you have to imagine the surroundings of Amsterdam like that around 1200. This was a swamp. And around 1200, there's a legend, the legend of the city of Amsterdam, that basically goes like this. A man, or two men and a dog, they're sailing on het IJ, and het IJ is the water just behind Central Station. When they get into rough weather and their dog gets really sick, and they decide to go to the shore, and where they land on the shore, the dog, he jumps onto the shore and he vomits. And that's basically where Amsterdam was started. So I like that story because that some people think Amsterdam was built on rock and roll. I think Amsterdam was built on vomit. It's kind of more suitable for the city. It's a little bit dirty. It's a bit of filthy of a city. And also it's a story with sailors. And this city owes a lot of its wealth from going out into the sea. I don't think it's true though. We know that around 1200 people started living around here. Typically, as they were Dutch, the first thing they did, they lived on the side of a river. What they did do, they built a dike. Like the Dutch, we build dikes all the time. So, and as they had two dikes on the side of the river, they had to cross the river sometimes, and in order to do that, a dam was built, a dam with a little opening so that you could let boats through, and some locks eventually. And the place where the dam was crossing the river Amstel, was basically the place that gave the name to the city as well, Amsterdam. So that's how the name of the city has originated. The dam we still know, we just met each other on the dam, like the Dam Square. So that place is exactly where that dam used to be. You can see from Dam Square Central Station, you can imagine that the water used to continue all the way to Central Station and there go into the sea. So that's basically the first origins around 1200. A very important thing happens in 1275, which is that Amsterdam gets a privilege from the Count of Holland, a very influential man at the time. Holland is just a province in the Netherlands. In case you're wondering, what is this thing with the Netherlands and Holland? So we have two provinces, North and South Holland, within the country of the Netherlands. But back in those days, Holland was kind of an independent county, and the Count of Holland in that time, he gave Amsterdam a privilege because he wanted Amsterdam to come to his side. Amsterdam was still undecided whether or not they wanted to join the Bishop of Utrecht or the Count of Holland. Eventually they chose the Count of Holland because they got the toll privilege, and this toll privilege meant that they were allowed to sail throughout Holland and do trade without paying taxes. And it was very important. This has basically has catalyzed the economic growth of Amsterdam immediately from that moment on. So toll privilege, one important thing. And then a second important thing happens in the 14th century, mid-14th century, a miracle happens. The miracle of Amsterdam. Basically this goes like this, a man, he's very sick, he's about to die, and he calls for a priest, and the priest arrives and the priest gives the man a wafer, the body of Christ basically, and this man eats it, but immediately vomits. There we have it again, vomit. It will reoccur in this city. There's a thing with vomit, unfortunately. But he vomits and it's there on the floor, but it's a holy thing, this wafer. You cannot really throw it into the garbage. This man obviously doesn't want to eat it anymore, so then it's decided they will put it in the fire, and they put it in the fire, but it doesn't burn. It's kind of a miracle. So they decide to take this wafer to the church. Next day the wafer is miraculously gone from the church, and that same man that was so sick and now feels a lot better suddenly sees the wafer back in his fireplace. He takes it back to the church. Next morning, wafer is back in his fireplace. A miracle. Now, this is declared an official miracle eventually by the Bishop of Utrecht, and they start to build like a little shrine around this fireplace, and eventually a church around the fireplace. And I've been doing some research on miracles in Europe, and I found that around the same time about 200 similar miracles happened all over Europe. So this whole miracle was not such a new thing or such a unique thing. But I think what is unique for Amsterdam is the way Amsterdam found ways to cash in on this miracle. So from that moment on already, they built a special road going all the way through the center of Amsterdam, especially to this location. Little stalls are there, and basically the first tourism already in the 14th century starts to emerge from this. So Amsterdam has a good economic position because of the trade, but also a very strong position because of pilgrimage, being a pilgrimage destination, basically.
පටන් ගන්න යන ගමන් ඉන්නේ ගයිඩ් ඔක්කොම එක්ස්ප්ලেইন කරනවා ඒකින්ද මම එක්ස්ප්ලেইন කරන්න යන්නේ ඒ යන හැම තැන් ටිකම ඔයගොල්ලන්ට පෙන්නන්න.
So we have this 14th century Amsterdam, right? The 14th century Amsterdam is built out of wood. Wood was very cheap. Amsterdam has a good trade relationship, especially with Hamburg, because Hamburg was a good place to get beer, but Hamburg was also a good place to get wood, because wood was coming from Scandinavia, easily coming in. So we built all these houses on wood, and as long as houses were built on wood in the city, everything was fine. But so the one problem with wood is obviously it burns. So in the 14th century we had two big fires here in the city that destroyed the city, and the city of Amsterdam decided to start building a city made out of brick. One little problem though, like Amsterdam is built on mud. You know, this whole area, as I told you, is around Amsterdam is swamp, and if you start building concrete building or like stone buildings on mud, something like this happens. You know, like houses start to sink. So we had to find a solution for that, and the solution we found is basically we built every house on poles. Already all the way from back then, from the 14th century, we started putting poles in the ground. Usually a house in Amsterdam has somewhere between 10 and 20 of these wooden poles that go 11 meters, so like 33 feet down. All these houses, they're built originally as warehouses. So the idea would be like on the ground floor the family is living, down in the basement you have the servants, and all the top floors would be to store things. Amsterdam is a city of merchants, and these merchants always needed a place to store things high and dry. But the staircases are way too small to carry your goods all the way up. So what we do, we have all these, and you will see them almost every old house in Amsterdam has a beam sticking out with a hook on it. So you can put a pulley system on there, it's like a wheel with a rope on it. I don't know if there is one visible. I think there's one here behind this tree. I think we're going to see that one later. But yeah, it's very simple. So yeah, you just have a big net. You can put stuff in there, and you put on some gloves because these ropes, they're very thick, and if they run through your hands, they will burn your hands. And then you start pulleying things up. Like I've actually done that with my friends to start finding, you know, see if you can get them to the top floor and back. So this is still nowadays the way we move around. Like if you move from one house to the other, most people do what we call this tower and block. We use this system all the time for moving. Professional housing moving companies also use it. It's basically how this is. So the reason a house is leaning forward a little bit is because if they would be exactly straight and you would pull something up with this pulley system, they would scrape alongside the front of the house, which you don't want for the house and for the stuff that you're pulling up. So if you build the house leaning a little bit forward, it will always be hanging a little bit away from this house. Do you guys see those very rusty bicycles?
Yeah.
Heb je die uit de gracht? Heb je die fiets uit de gracht? Did you take those bicycles out of the canal? Yeah? Okay. I'll get back to that. But the canals in Amsterdam are full with bicycles. There's a boat that goes around the city. with an arm, taking out bicycles out of the canals all the time. On average, they take about 10,000 bicycles per year out of these canals. So it's it's insane the amount of. So we have this joke that we say here in Amsterdam, like the canal is 3 meter deep. It's just 1 meter mud, 1 meter bicycles, and 1 meter dead English tourists. So it's like kind of the feeling people have about it. But yeah, so it constantly needs to be cleaned. We have 165 canals. We have more canals than Venice and Amsterdam. We have 1,300 bridges, or more than 1,300 bridges over these canals. And basically these canals, they are, you can see in the way that they're built, how Amsterdam has expanded. If you look at the map of Amsterdam, you will see like there's the water where now Central Station is, the water behind, and then you see that Amsterdam is basically built in this kind of horseshoe shape rings that just start to expand and expand. So as that company got more powerful and richer, more and more people started coming to Amsterdam, and they all started to build these beautiful houses. And every time a new row of houses had to be built, before we built anything else, we dug a canal. And why was that? Because, as I told you, most of these houses, they were built as warehouses, so those goods had to be transported, and the way to do that was from a ship. They would arrive on a ship, you would load them onto a smaller ship, and you would use these canals as a way to get to the place wherever you needed to store something. So that's why we started building this in these little rings. There was another reason that we built Amsterdam in that horseshoe shape rings, and that was all because Amsterdam was easier to defend like that. So the place I'm standing on right now was all the so again, like back in the 16th century, here was a wall. So this was really the edge of the city. Over there were fields, and there would be 2 gates in the wall. They would close every night at 9:30. They would close the gates, and Amsterdam would be nicely protected, because if you're behind the water, it's very easy to defend yourself. You can demolish the bridges if things get really serious. And basically this strategy of defending ourselves, we've used it for Amsterdam, for the city. We've also used it for the Netherlands as a country. You might know that the Netherlands is below sea level, at least more than half of it. That's also why we are so tall, the Dutch, because we're constantly trying to get our heads above sea levels. But the way we took that water, it's like the way we made that lens, we took it from the sea. So we built usually a square of dams. Then we pumped all the water that was inside the square outside. That's also why you see so many windmills in the Netherlands. Most of these windmills were built in order to pump the water out. And then basically whatever ground is in between, it will sink down a little bit, will get below sea level, but you have land to work on, to grow your vegetables on, to live off. So we've used that the technique to take our lands, but we can at any time, still nowadays, if you want to, we can pinch those dikes and just create an artificial island out of half of the country. We've done it in the Second World War, we've done it in the War with the Spanish. It's a common strategy. And with that same kind of idea, Amsterdam is also built that if you demolish the bridges, you have like a city ring that you can defend. The last reason that we built so many canals is for sewage. So you have to imagine that in those days, obviously people didn't have the same flush toilets that we have now. People had a bucket at home. So you were doing your thing on a bucket, and then whenever the bucket was full, unless there would be somebody really annoying and drunk and obnoxious in the street that you could let know that you had to calm down, you had to empty that bucket somewhere. And people originally just threw it into the canal, and then obviously that started to smell really bad. So what the city then did was they started to invent like this system of locks that you could open and close, and that you could flush the canals, and that still happens nowadays. So like still every week, twice a week, every canal in Amsterdam is flushed, let's say, which happens just by opening 2 doors on 2 sides. And because one side of the city, the river, the Amstel River, comes in, we always have an inflow of fresh water that we can redirect through some canals, and by that flush out dead English tourists probably. So by the way, we don't call them canals, we call them grachts. And can you guys say grachts? Maybe it's time for a little Dutch lesson. Gracht. Okay, pretty good. 88. 88. Not bad. Schraapstijl. You guys are really good. Okay, this Dutch is really working for you. Zwaffelen.
Waffelen.
Zwaffelen.
Zwaffelen.
Zwaffelen is your best word so far, but no. Zwaffelen means gently hitting your dick against something. It was chosen word of the year in the Netherlands 3 years ago, and it became a thing. So I mean, it's a reason people chose it as a word of the year, because kids all over Amsterdam and the Netherlands in general were doing it and making little videos of it and then getting. Can you imagine? Like this, for me too, it was the weirdest. You know, sometimes you read about the latest trend among teenagers and you're like, that's strange. But this one was really like, what? What do you do? So really, like, of course, like if it was your teacher's car, it would be cool. If it was the palace on Dam Square, it was even cooler. And if you could swaffle the prime minister, you would be like, it was this kind of idea. So swaffelen is really well good. There's a word that you can pronounce very easily and remember. And we have the coat of arms of Amsterdam. So the coat of arms of Amsterdam has its 3 crosses. There's the crosses of Saint Andreas. Well, there's a lot of theories around why Amsterdam has these 3 crosses, and actually historians can't really decide upon which of the theories is true. But the most commonly believed is that these 3 crosses are to protect the city against the 3 main threats of the city. So that being floods, obviously, because we live below sea level, and then the fires and the bubonic plague, the Black Plague. And no, there should be a 4th cross. Yeah. Just a little lock hanging underneath, maybe. Yeah. I mean, floods are obviously the thing that we're always scared of. We had a big one in '53 in the southwest of the Netherlands. Hundreds of people died because there was a moment that the sea just pinched the dikes. And there's a lot of Americans here. Like I've heard that in America, a lot of people learn that the Dutch, they protect, or like a little boy once saved the country by putting a finger in a dike. That's in case you ever heard that story. That is not true. So we all know in the Netherlands, if the dikes are about to break, you run. Ideally on top of the dike, which is the safest place to be, but you don't put a finger in the dike. I think if you Google putting a finger in the dike in Holland, you will get to some very weird lesbian websites, but definitely nothing. Saving your country. Just for you guys to know, when the dikes are about to break, just go to a high place and be safe. But it's a very beautiful former orphanage, and we're gonna make our way through. Just one thing I need to mention: we're gonna cross this street here. This is the main shopping street of Amsterdam that we're going to cross. So like if you ever play Monopoly, you know that there's always one street that is the most expensive in the capital city, blah, blah, blah. It's that street. Personally, I consider this street the way to hell. I always try to avoid it, but unfortunately we need to cross it, so I just want to warn you that it can be very difficult. These are gavelstones, and gavelstones are basically the way that people in Amsterdam used to identify their houses. So instead of having numbers on the houses, all the houses in Amsterdam used to have a stone like this. If you would ask somebody where do you live, somebody would say, well, I live on this and this street, I live in the house with the gavellstone, which, for example, this is Alkmaar, this is a city in the Netherlands, these three are cities. But gavelstones there are many different shapes and sizes. Sometimes they're actually making a joke. Some gavelstones just have like a joke incorporated in them. Other ones are about what job you used to have. That man with this very weird hat over there is somebody who carries grain. So very little happened with a very weird hat on your head. The grote kies, the big tooth over there was a dentist. I don't know what a gynecologist would look like, but you know, you have like different kinds of cobblestones that communicate different kinds of professions. But also sometimes it's just kind of unclear what the cobblestone really means. This one over here, this man with the glass, nobody really knows why the owner of that house chose this particular image, but it's still there. These cobblestones, you still find them on a lot of houses in Amsterdam, and actually I tell this story also because I want to invite you as you walk through the city to keep an eye out for them, because I really like the way that they tell you a little bit about the family that used to live there. They kind of they were replaced by numbers in the times of Napoleon. So I've been telling a lot about the good times in Amsterdam, the Dutch East India Company, how Amsterdam got very rich, all the way up to the 1800s. In 1799, the troops of Napoleon enter the Netherlands. They take over the country, and Napoleon basically came to Holland for two reasons. He took Holland for two reasons. He needed money and he needed soldiers for his fights. So in order to collect that money, he thought it would be very useful if houses had numbers, because then you could actually start collecting, you know, taxes from people, and also collecting young men to join the war. So he kind of changed that concept of cobblestones for numbers. He also introduced surnames. We didn't have surnames before that. You were simply named, so my name is Fabian, I'm the son of Frank. You were Fabian, the son of Frank. I think especially in Scandinavia, you still have a lot of this, like Ericsson, or like you know, like this kind of direct connections. In the Netherlands, though, when Napoleon arrived, nobody really took that serious. This whole idea of surnames. Everybody was sure, like, okay, you know, like this is going to last for 10, 15 years. The French are going to leave, and this whole weird concept of having a surname is going to disappear. So what did people do? They chose the weirdest last names. People named themselves poepjes, which means little pieces of shit. People called themselves in the jar of mustard. I know a couple, his last name was born naked, which is already quite weird. Well, I mean, it's not weird, everybody's born naked, but just to choose this as a last name. Her last name was in the field. They got married, they're now fully named born naked in the field. This is their actual last name, that if you write them a letter, you have to write the whole thing down. So like this you know, it really changed.
So do they conjugate the surnames here? Like
you can. So it's a conscious decision. It was more common to just pick the man's name, but I mean, times moved on.
Okay, so it's more of a modern.
It's more a modern. It's not like in Portugal where they always do it, for example,
Right.
and then they add it, and people have like surnames that, you know,
Go
the
on
whole
forever.
family is involved in that surname at some point. But here we usually have one, or you can choose if you're more progressive, let's say, to combine the two names. So, yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, but these cobblestones, I love them. I want to walk around a little bit. So there's a foundation that whenever a house gets demolished, that has a cobblestone, this foundation goes out to retrieve the cobblestone and finds its a place in the city. This wall is part of it. I want to go around around the corner because there's much more of them. Some of my favorite ones are right here. This is the Empress, the wife of the Emperor, who's apparently a very unhappy woman. That one is just named, the smaak means the taste of something. And I'm always surprised by, I don't know what she's tasting, but it definitely doesn't taste very good, you know, like just the expression on her face is really weird. This one is the crowned man who eats white bread. How specific can you get when you want to describe yourself or your house or your family? And I'm also really fond of the nun, because the nun apparently is really into partying. She's like holding up a glass, she's kind of dancing. This used to be squatted, so squatting, you know, when a house is empty and you move in. These guys now they bought the building, but it's still considered kind of the headquarters of at least the squatting movement here in the center. And I want to tell you a little bit about the squatting movement because it has been quite important to this city in multiple ways. For example, the city back in the 70s was planning to demolish a lot of the old houses in the city, and old houses obviously kind of is what gives the city its charm. Nowadays it's all UNESCO World Heritage and we're trying to protect it, but back in those days You have to imagine just, quite soon after the Second World War, there was no money in the city, lots of buildings were run down, were falling apart, and the city said, we're just going to clean up, demolish all this old stuff, and then build new buildings. But the city had enough money to buy those houses of their owners, but then didn't really have enough money to demolish them and to build something new. So what happened is there was a lot of empty buildings all over the city. And at the same time, this is the time of the baby boom, just after the Second World War, there was a big baby boom, lots of young people, and they started moving to the city, they wanted to study and so forth, and they were desperately looking for housing. So you can imagine it was perfect ground for a squatting movement to emerge from. And it also did, and it became very powerful. So powerful that some neighborhoods were kind of considered no-go area for the police because the squatters were running the seas. This movement is still very active. Still houses being squatted almost every week. Places like this support it as well. So every neighborhood in the city has like what is called a kraakspreker, squatting council that you can go to if you're planning to squat a house. You can say, I found this house, it's empty, I'm planning to squat it. They will help you with a breaking crew, they will help you with somebody talking to the police. They have very good police spokesmen that have years of experience, they often know the different police officers in the neighborhood personally from years of doing this kind of talks. A group of people will be there to kind of protect your action. They will help you with writing statements in the media, with writing a neighborhood letter and so forth. So there's a lot of infrastructure around. Has been a very important movement in the city. I'm just giving you a little part of actually what is normally the alternative tour of Amsterdam. But because we passed by this building, I think it's important to tell this story. He doesn't look like he's having great sexual pleasure, and as a matter of fact, he chose this name because in Latin it means "I suffered a lot," which is much more, I think, close to the expression on his face. So he chose that name because this is a man. You have to understand that after the French left the Netherlands, the country took over that former East India Company, and that included parts of Indonesia. And the Netherlands started to conquer more parts of Indonesia, and it became one of our basically our main colony. We had some other islands of the coast of Venezuela, but and being in the hands of the Dutch government, Indonesia was really one of the cash cows of the Dutch economy at the time, and nobody really cared how we made all that money as long as the money was coming in. Typically Dutch. So that meant also we were treating the people in Indonesia pretty bad. This guy, he went in, he was born in 1820. When he was 18 years old, he left Indonesia as a civil servant. And he immediately noticed like how bad the Dutch were treating everybody there. And he started writing, he was a very correct man, so he started writing reports to the government, to his superiors wouldn't listen, then to higher superiors, the higher superiors wouldn't listen, and so on and so on. And eventually he got really fed up with the fact that nobody really seemed to care about these people. And he decided to do something completely different than writing a report. He decided to write a book. And he wrote a book that's named Max Havelaar, and this book completely changed our attitude towards our colonies. The book was so powerful that when he finished it, he sent it to his publisher in Amsterdam, and this publisher in Amsterdam had some friends that were involved in the business with Indonesia. And the first thing the publisher was not to publish the book, but instead he informed all his friends. He said, like, I have this book, it's going to change things forever. So, I just want to let you guys know this is going to be really bad for business. And these businessmen at first, they tried to convince this guy to not publish the book by offering him a really high position in the West Indies, so off the coast of Venezuela, Curaçao. And but he refused to take a better position, take the money, and not publish his book. He went on with it, and that's very important because, yeah, like I said, this book really changed the Dutch attitude towards our colonies. It started off a movement here in the Netherlands that really said, okay, we might make a lot of money out of this place, but we also really have to be concerned about people's welfare in these places and about fair trade. We still have a very important fair trade brand in the Netherlands that's called Max Havelaar, that's named after this book. The book was also translated in multiple different languages. Sigmund Freud tried to read it in Dutch, apparently. Karl Marx has also tried to read it in Dutch. They both failed and then just went to the German translation, but it's a lot easier. But it's been a very influential book, and this man is really considered, in retrospect, one of the heroes of our country. And we put a statue of him on this bridge. This bridge is one of the most, this is the oldest bridge that is still left in Amsterdam, or that's still in its original state. This is from 1648, this bridge. It's also the widest bridge. You can see that the reason it's so wide is because this used to be one of the city gates. There used to be a big tower over here. And when they built the bridge, they said, let's make some money out of building this bridge, typically Dutch once again. You can just make a bridge, but that's not going to make any money. If you make it very wide, then you can rent out stalls on both sides of the bridge to people that, like farmers from the neighborhood. Obviously, one of the main gates going into the city is a good place to sell stuff. So that's why this bridge is so wide. It's 42 meters wide. So if you take that house, for example, you see this house is painted kind of brown reddish. That house fits 21 times into this bridge. That house is only 2 meters wide. So reason people build houses like this is because you used to pay taxes over the width of your building. The wider the house, the more taxes you were paying. So we have a lot of very small. This is actually not the smallest house in Amsterdam. We have 2 other ones that are even smaller. Now, guys, thanks for taking over this tour completely.
No worries.
I think the rain is already stopped.
And for you as well.
Oh.
Awesome.
Do they get a special discount if they buy cheese?
Yeah, if you mention his name, Fabian, or mention his company that you did a walking tour with them, you can get a 10% discount with us on all the cheeses and even the cutting boards.
You see, this is a complete marketing trick. We ordered this rain in order to make you guys come in here.
Very nice, very cheap.
It's right now. So, thank you, Will.
Asti?
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna end this tour because it's raining way too much and we need to get in somewhere. So I want to thank you guys all very much for coming. I'm sorry for this ending, but yeah, this is the Netherlands. Not much we can do about it. I hope you guys had a great tour, all of you. I want to thank you for coming. And I say be off and find a safe place, a dry place at least. Yeah. You want to rate us on TripAdvisor? My name is Fabian. And yeah, I hope you guys have a good time in Amsterdam. I hope the weather gets a little bit better.
Thank you.
Can't get much worse.
සිටි ටුවර් එක දැන් ඉවරුණා. වැස්ස හින්දා මේ කලින් ඉවර කරා. මම මේ පේනවනේ හොඳට නාලා ඉන්නේ දැන්. දැන් මම තව ටිකක් යනවා මේ මගේ කවුච් සර්ෆින් හොස්ට් ගෙදරට. ගිහිල්ලා රෙස් කරලා මේ හෙට උදේ යන්න තියෙනවා වෙන සිටි එකකට. මම හෙට උදේට කියන්නම් මම හෙට කොහෙද යන්නේ කියලා. දැන් පොඩ්ඩක් සුපර් මාකට් එකක් පාගෙන යන ගමන් ඉන්නේ මේ අද මම හොස්ට් ගෙදර ශ්‍රී ලංකන් ස්ටයිල් එකට කුක් කරන්න කියලා හිතන් ඉන්නේ. එහෙනම් පුළුවන් වුණොත් වීඩියෝ එක දාන්න හොස්ට් ගෙදරදී. එහෙනම් මම පස්සේ ආපහු ඔයගොල්ලන්ට කතා කරන්න.
Tutti.
Then you can tell like Subha Udasana.
Suga Adesana.